Before Honda became a name stamped on millions of machines around the world, it was the name of a man whose work had just been rejected. The workshop was quiet. On the table lay 50 piston rings, each one machined by hand, each one meant to prove that a self-taught mechanic from Hamamatsu belonged in the same room as Japan's most demanding automaker. Soichiro Honda had spent nights bent over this work, grease under his nails, eyes stinging from the light of a single bulb. He believed the rings were ready. He believed his years of practical knowledge, of taking engines apart and putting them back together until he understood them the way other men understood language, had finally produced something worthy of Toyota's production line. Only 3 of the 50 rings passed inspection. The other 47 were set aside, deemed useless. There was no ceremony to the rejection, no dramatic confrontation, just numbers on a quality report, and the quiet, specific verdict that his metal did not meet the standard. He was not rejected as a dreamer. He was rejected as an engineer, and in an industry built on tolerances measured in fractions of a millimeter. That distinction mattered more than any encouragement ever could. He had built the part, but he had not yet built the process. Long before piston rings, before factories, before the name Honda meant anything to anyone, there was a boy in Shizuoka Prefecture who could not walk past a machine without stopping. His father ran a bicycle repair shop, and the smell of oil and hot metal was simply the smell of home. Soichiro was not the kind of child who excelled in a classroom. He struggled with formal schooling in ways that worried his teachers. But give him a broken engine, a bent gear, a bicycle chain that refused to turn smoothly, and he would work at it for hours, refusing to eat, refusing to stop until the machine did what he needed it to do. The turning point came when he was still a boy, watching a Model T Ford pass through his town. He had never seen an automobile move under its own power before. Without thinking, he ran after it down the road, chasing the impossible sight for as long as his legs would carry him. He did not understand the engineering yet, but something in him had already decided that he needed to. At 15, he left home for Tokyo to apprentice at Art Shokai, an automobile repair garage. He had no money, no formal training, and no connections. What he had was an obsessive attentiveness to how things worked, and a willingness to do the unglamorous labor that most young apprentices avoided. His employer noticed something in him that could not be taught, a mechanical instinct sharpened not by books, but by thousands of hours with his hands inside broken machines. Honda did not simply want to understand engines. He wanted to work with them until they responded to him the way a trained animal responds to someone who has earned its trust. By his mid-20s, Honda was no longer content to repair what other people had built. He wanted to manufacture something of his own, something small, precise, and essential. He settled on piston rings, a component so difficult to produce correctly that in the late 1930s, a well-made ring was valued more highly than silver. It was not a glamorous ambition. Nobody dreams as a child of making piston rings. But Honda understood something that would define his entire career. A great machine is built from small parts that refuse to fail. With backing from an acquaintance named Kato Shichiro, Honda founded Tokai Seiki, the Eastern Sea Precision Machine Company, working by day at his old repair shop, and by night on his new obsession. He believed his hands alone could solve the problem. They could not. His early attempts at die-casting the rings failed one after another. He lacked something no amount of raw talent could replace: formal knowledge of metallurgy. It was this gap, not a lack of ambition, that stood between him and Toyota's approval. So he did something that many self-taught men resist. He went back to school. Nearly 30 years old, Honda enrolled part-time at an engineering institute, sitting beside students half his age, studying the chemistry and physics of metal he had spent years trying to master through instinct alone. He worked by day, studied by night, and visited manufacturing plants across Japan to observe how other companies solved the same problem that was defeating him. 2 years later, he submitted a new set of rings to Toyota. Only 3 of 50 passed. For a man who had already reorganized his entire life around solving this one problem, the second rejection carried a different weight than the first. It was not a stranger's dismissal of an unproven company. It was a verdict on 2 years of deliberate, disciplined effort. and it told him something uncomfortable. Passion for machines was not the same as mastery of process. An engine did not care how much a man loved it. It only responded to precision. He did not walk away. He kept studying, kept testing, kept refining the process one failed batch at a time, until the rings finally met the tolerance Toyota demanded. In 1939, he handed his old repair shop over to his own apprentices and became president of Tokai Seiki full-time. Production of piston rings for Toyota finally began. Within a few years, the company had grown into a supplier, trusted not only by Toyota but by Nakajima Aircraft as well, employing more than 2,000 people at its peak. For a moment, it looked as though the story might end there. A mechanic's son who had clawed his way into industrial respectability through sheer persistence. But Japan itself was about to be pulled into a war that would leave nothing untouched, including the factory Honda had built with 2 years of study and countless failed batches of metal. When Japan entered the Pacific War, Tokai Seiki was placed under the control of the Ministry of Munitions. Toyota acquired a significant stake in the company, and Honda, once its president, was demoted to senior managing director in the very business he had built from nothing. His factory was repurposed for the war effort, producing piston rings for military trucks, aircraft, and naval vessels. With most able-bodied men called into military service, Honda found himself training inexperienced volunteer laborers, many of them women and students, calibrating machines himself so the work could be done safely and consistently. Even under wartime constraint, his instinct for solving mechanical problems did not disappear. When a musical instrument manufacturer needed a faster way to produce wooden aircraft propellers, Honda designed the milling machines that made it possible, despite having no formal training in the field. Then the war reached his own walls. In late 1944, American B-29 bombers struck Tokai Seiki's Yamashita plant, reducing part of what he had built to rubble. He had survived rejection, but rejection leaves the workshop standing. War does not. The following year, before he had time to fully rebuild, an earthquake struck the region and brought down what remained of another Tokai Seiki facility. The factory was still there in memory, but not in the world. 2 catastrophes, arriving one after the other, did not simply cost him equipment. They ended a chapter of his life that had taken more than a decade to write. The company he had studied, failed, and clawed his way into leading no longer had a home. In the ruins of post-war Japan, Honda made a decision that many founders in his position would have resisted. Rather than trying to rebuild Tokai Seiki exactly as it had been, he sold what remained of the company to Toyota. It was not a simple defeat. It was a closing of one version of his working life in order to make room for whatever came next. He took the proceeds from that sale and for a time did very little with them at all. Like many men returning to a shattered economy, he spent nearly a year adrift, uncertain what to build in a country that had lost so much of what it once had. Post-war Japan did not offer opportunity in any traditional sense. It offered scarcity. Roads were damaged. Fuel was rationed. Public transportation was unreliable at best, and ordinary people still needed to move, to work, to trade, to simply survive the daily business of living in a broken economy. The market was not asking for innovation. It was asking for movement at the lowest possible cost. By the summer of 1946, Honda and his younger brother had set up a small shop on the site of his ruined piston ring plant. They tried several ventures that went nowhere. A rotary weaving machine, frosted glass panels, woven roof tiles. None of it worked. Then Honda came across a small gasoline engine, originally built to power military radio equipment, sitting unused among war surplus. He had an idea simple enough to seem almost obvious in hindsight. Attach the little engine to a bicycle. In a country trying to move again, even a bicycle with a small engine could feel like freedom. The motorized bicycle was not a luxury product. It was a practical answer to an urgent problem, built from whatever materials could be found. Honda acquired several hundred surplus engines and began attaching them to bicycles, creating a cheap, functional way for people to travel farther than their legs alone could carry them. Demand grew almost immediately. People did not care that the machine lacked polish. They cared that it worked, and that they could finally get to where they needed to go. In 1946, Honda formally established the Honda Technical Research Institute on the site of his old, ruined factory. It bore little resemblance to the industrial operation he had once led. It was small, improvised, and undercapitalized. A handful of engineers working with limited materials, building small engines one at a time. But it represented something Honda had learned through every failure that came before it. He was no longer trying to impress a large company with a technically perfect part. He was trying to solve a real problem for people who needed a real solution immediately. As the supply of surplus military engines ran out, Honda's team began designing their own small engines from scratch, refining them with the same obsessive attention he had once poured into piston rings. Each improvement in reliability, each gain in efficiency, brought a small but steady increase in demand. The motorized bicycles evolved into the company's first true motorcycles. Growth did not come from a single breakthrough. It came from a long sequence of small, disciplined improvements, each one correcting a specific weakness in the last. But a growing product line was not the same as a growing company. Honda understood engines better than almost anyone in Japan. He understood far less about financing, distribution, and the discipline required to scale a business beyond a workshop. It was in this gap that Takeo Fujisawa entered the story. Where Honda was consumed by the technical soul of the machine, Fujisawa brought structure to the business around it, securing capital, organizing sales, and building the kind of commercial foundation that pure engineering talent could never provide on its own. Honda could make the machine move. Fujisawa helped make the company move. In 1948, the Honda Technical Research Institute gave way to a new entity, Honda Motor Company. It was a modest operation compared to the industrial giant it would become, but it now had both a brilliant technical founder and a partner capable of translating that talent into a sustainable business. Together, they expanded the motorcycle line, entered competitive racing to prove the reliability of their engineering on the world stage, and steadily built a reputation that extended beyond Japan's borders. The growth that followed was not accidental. It was the product of three things converging at once: a real, urgent need in the market for affordable transportation, an almost obsessive technical standard inherited from years of failed piston rings and rebuilt factories, and a commercial partnership capable of turning good engineering into a company that could actually scale. Honda motorcycles found their way into international markets. Racing victories proved that a company born out of post-war scarcity could compete with and beat established manufacturers with far longer histories. Eventually, Honda expanded into automobiles, entering an industry dominated by the very company that had once rejected his piston rings, and building a place for itself there as well. By the time Soichiro Honda stepped back from daily leadership decades later, the company that bore his name had grown into one of the most respected manufacturers in the world, producing motorcycles, automobiles, and engines used across the globe. It was a long way from a workshop table holding 50 rejected piston rings. Soichiro Honda did not build a global giant because failure made him stronger in some vague romantic way. He built it because every failure made him more exact. Rejection taught quality, war taught adaptation, ruin taught simplicity, and post-war Japan taught him that the strongest business ideas are not always the most glamorous. Sometimes they are the ones people need immediately. This is Built from Ruin. Real stories, real failure, real comebacks.